Good morning, everybody. I'm Muriel Bowser. I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C. Today, I'm going to provide the district's update on our response to COVID-19. And the majority of our discussion today will be focused on our hospitality and tourism industry. In usual times, in ordinary times, we would be talking together about what Elliott coins the travel rally, where we talk about all of the good things that happened in the previous year, what's happened currently, and what our plans are for our destination today. So Elliott Ferguson, who is the president and CEO of Destination DC, will continue today to talk about the good things that happen in travel and tourism in Washington, D.C., talk about present travel challenges and how we plan to recover. We're also joined by Greg Odell, who is the president and CEO of Events DC, Roger Dow, who's the president and CEO of U.S. Travel, of the U.S. Travel Association, and joining us virtually is Chris Thompson, president and CEO of Brand USA, as well as John Felchicchio, who is the deputy mayor for planning and economic development. Before we jump in, I want to acknowledge that today is National Nurses Day. We have over 30,000 nurses in the district, and they are playing a critical role in our response. Everything from providing life-saving care to serving as contact tracers, and we are grateful for all of them. So please make sure that you thank a nurse today. And even though she's retired for many years, I'm going to thank my favorite nurse, my mother, Joan Bowser. So thank you, Mom, for all of your years of service in Washington, D.C. So please remember to reach out to the healthcare professionals in your life and that you know, or that who may be your neighbors and who are nurses who are serving on the front line of this pandemic. I will share with you that today we are reporting 5,461 total cases, positive cases of COVID-19 in the district. And sadly, I also report that we have 277 Washingtonians that have succumbed to the virus. On Monday, we also shared with you two neighborhoods that are of specific concern right now with levels of infection. We wanted to let you know, too, that we would be releasing neighborhood data moving forward that shows all of DC's neighborhoods according to the chart that you see on the slide. And you can go to coronavirus.dc.gov to find out more information about all DC neighborhoods. We want to continue to remind you to do your part. We are all talking about the part that the government plays, but we would not be able to be successful in containing this virus, getting on the other side of this virus, and getting back to our normal lives if we all didn't do our part. So let me remind you to continue to stay home except for essential activities. When you do leave home, please wear a mask. And listen to your body for any signs that you don't feel well, and call your doctor or call one of our free testing hotlines. Those numbers, let me remind you, are 855-363-0333, and in English and Spanish is 844-796-2797. So for workers who are in the hospitality industry who have a symptom or who have a known exposure, please make sure that you are calling one of these numbers for free testing. I also want to remind everyone who lives or works in D.C. to take part in the Reopen D.C. survey. That survey can be found at coronavirus.dc.gov /reopendc This is providing very rich information to all of the 11 sector committees and to the steering committee. I'm pleased that over 10,000 people have responded. We're going to keep the survey open through Thursday, but we want to hear from you, and there's time to participate. So speaking of Reopen DC, two of our guests today are part of the Committee on Faith, Arts, Culture, Hotels, Entertainment, and Sports. Greg Odell and Elliot Ferguson are both part of this process, and are as leaders in our city. They are helping us think through how we will open and bring attractions and events back to DC. We heard from our Chief Financial Officer just a week or so ago, who shared that about 60% of our restaurants are open right now, and they're bringing in less than 20% of their normal sales. And only about half of our hotels are open, and they are operating between 5 and 10% of their normal capacity. So we know that reflects a lot of lost wages for workers and a lot of lost revenue for our city. So an important part of planning for our recovery is thinking about how we safely bring these industries back online and what that looks like until we have a treatment or a vaccine. We know it won't all happen at once, but I'm grateful to have these outstanding leaders and thought leaders to help us think through this. I want to now turn to Elliot, who is going to begin his presentation, followed by Roger Dow and Chris Thompson. Thank you, Elliot.
All right. Good morning, and thank you, Mayor Bowser, and to you and your amazing administration. We want to commend you and thank you for your leadership through this pandemic. As everyone has stated, these are unprecedented times for all of us. Now, as we talk about the importance of promoting tourism and conventions, we recognize one key thing. One, it's not safe to travel, and the importance of understanding and following the mayor's recommendations in terms of safety is extremely important. But for us, it's really about planning for the future and about recovery. Typically around this time each year, we hold what is called the U.S. Travel Association's National Travel and Tourism Week. We hold a rally to focus on all the amazing things tied to travel, specifically to Washington, D.C., and of course the resilience of our industry as a whole. It's usually the time where we announce record visitation from previous years and detail how tourism positively impacts the economy here in D.C. Now, no matter what we talk about in terms of 2019, nothing makes up for what we're currently experiencing as a destination and, of course, globally. But I'll start with sharing the numbers to give you some insight as to how important travel and tourism is to the D.C. economy. Last year, we had record attendance with over 22.8 million domestic visitors coming to Washington, D.C., $8.2 billion in spending, and $896 million in taxes generated because of this industry. Furthermore, this industry employs over 78,000 people and jobs supported in Washington, D.C. So we had a lot of momentum in 2019, and that meant a lot for us last year in terms of the economic value of what we do. So now the question is, how do we get back on track once we are able to do so? It's going to take an aggressive marketing and promotion campaign to attract visitors back to Washington as a destination. And once again, we're going to continue to follow the guidelines by the mayor and her administration so that when the timing is right, Destination DC will continue to promote DC as a destination domestically and internationally. Now, we know one thing for a fact: our industry is all about economic development. And as we look at the impact of what we do in terms of promoting DC as a destination, the reality is for every dollar we spend on promoting DC, there's over a $3 return on investment tied to our marketing. So what that means for us is that promoting a destination like Washington, especially now, is more important than ever. Now, from a national perspective, we focus and work closely with the U.S. Travel Association as they're dealing with things on a federal level and making sure that our industry is healthy and whole, especially during times like this, by lobbying Congress. We're fortunate to serve and to have a role with the U.S. Travel Association, as I play an active role with the board of directors there. And at this time, I'd like to welcome and turn it over to Roger Dow, the president and CEO of the U.S. Travel Association, to share a little bit more about what they're doing. Roger?
Thank you, Elliot, and thank you, Mayor Bowser, for hosting this meeting. First of all, I'd like to commend Elliot, who's been an outstanding voice for our industry, not only here in D.C., but on the national level, as he is the national chair of our association. So we're grateful for his leadership, especially during the most critical time that I don't think he bargained for when he first took this job. I'd also like to thank Mayor Bowser for her efforts to keep residents and businesses in the District of Columbia safe, and her leadership during this crisis has been invaluable. I often refer to Mayor Bowser as America's travel mayor. In 2017, when D.C. hosted 6,000 of the world's largest buyers of travel from 70 countries, Mayor Bowser went back to her days as a tour guide and personally took the media on a double-decker tour of her city. The travel industry is very critical to our national economy, just like here in D.C. It's responsible for $2.6 trillion of revenue, 15.8 million jobs, 1 in 10. And the COVID-19 crisis has taken a terrible toll on the travel industry. We look to lose $500 billion this year and 8 million unemployed. That's almost 1/3 of all the unemployed come from the travel industry. That said, we're a resilient industry, and the theme for National Travel and Tourism Week is the spirit of travel. And our industry has a spirit like no other and will be back stronger than ever. When the time is right, the travel industry will have a vital role to play in fueling the economic recovery of both D.C. and communities all across America. Travel is the economic engine that powers communities around the country, cities large and small, rural and urban, and certainly right here in the nation's capital. U.S. Travel has been working with Congress and the administration to ensure that travel industry businesses like Destination DC and all others in our business play a huge role in the recovery effort. As we look beyond this crisis to the next phase, it's the health of travelers and employees that's most important, and communicating that to travelers and the industry that we're all taking appropriate steps together to protect their health and safety when they travel. U.S. Travel convened a task force of industry leaders from every travel segment: airports, airlines, rental cars, hotels, attractions, cruise ships, convention and meeting facilities, and medical professionals, and we work collaboratively to develop a core set of consistent health guidance for the travel industry businesses to implement when the time is right to reopen. We've shared this set of guidances with the White House, with the governors, and with Mayor Bowser. The path to recovery begins with putting the right health and safety practices in place that are in line with CDC's guidelines. It is also shared responsibility, so travelers do their part. Just as the mayor said, we all have to do our part, and not travel when you're sick, and follow hygiene guidelines when you travel. The public is going to see the travel industry is serious about making every step in the travel experience safe from a health experience. That's going to help get the country moving again and increase our industry's ability to restore jobs and our economic activity more quickly. In the meantime, it's more important than ever for our industry to come together, support each other, and remind America that the spirit of travel is not broken. National Travel and Tourism Week is a reminder of the strength and resiliency of our collective industry. Travel will have a powerful role to play in America's return and its growth to prosperity, and all of us in the industry are focused on a path to lead us there. The spirit of travel, I ask the partners across the industry remain strong. We look forward to showing our fellow Americans and the world the beauty, the excitement, the culture, the history, and the wonderful people of our great nation, starting right here in the nation's capital. Thank you again, Mayor Bowser, for inviting us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger.
So again, thank you, Roger, for your comments, and of course, it's a pleasure to serve on your board of directors. Now, as Roger talked about the importance of tourism on our economy, from our perspective, it's all about economic development. And the question right now is, what is exactly happening in Washington as we deal with this pandemic? To date, we've lost over $1.7 billion in travel spending because of this crisis, which is a 71% decline from where we should be. $78 million in taxes that normally would be generated have been lost because of this. So visitor spending is down significantly. We believe, from our perspective, and the mayor asks us all the time, what's next? And it's all tied to what we're going to be able to focus on in terms of promoting DC as a global and domestic destination. Recovery is tied to consumer confidence, and as the medical community has said, they're focusing on ways to manage this pandemic and its aftermath. 71% of American travelers surveyed said they're ready to get out there again. They miss traveling, they're tired of being at home, and they can't wait to get on the road. As a matter of fact, we were just having that conversation a few minutes ago. And that's specifically from information from destination analysts. With budgets taking a hit during this pandemic, we consider what we do in terms of marketing DC will be extremely important, as we're going to be focusing on what visitors can afford. And quite frankly, that's where DC really shines as a destination. We consider ourselves a great value simply because of the 100 free things that we have to offer to visitors coming to Washington as a destination. The 16 free Smithsonians, including the Zoo, the National Holocaust Museum, the National Gallery of Art, and of course, all the monuments, memorials, and museums that we have in our destination. The fact that the Eisenhower Memorial will be opening in September of this year will resonate, and we'll be able to focus on that with our efforts to bring individuals to the city. And of course, at the right time, we'll continue to focus on theater, festivals, sporting events, concerts, nightlife, and of course, major conventions coming to the city. These value messages are extremely important, and it will resonate as hotels will be offering deals to bring individuals back to the city. Now, as consumers begin to travel again, we'll be targeting different audiences regionally and from a drive-in perspective. We recognize the fact that 50 million people live within a 250-mile radius of Washington, and you bet we'll be focusing on that audience as we look at individuals coming to the city. But from our perspective, the landscape is extremely competitive, as we'll be promoting DC against a lot of amazing destinations in the U.S., and our goal is to bring more of these visitors to our backyard. Now, from an international perspective, the numbers in terms of international visitation are not out yet, and we'll have them fairly soon. But from our perspective, the international market is extremely important to us. They stay longer, they spend more, and we want that international market to return. But we know it's going to be a while before that happens. And we work really closely with the Airports Authority simply because of the long-term nonstop flights internationally to Washington, D.C., and of course those domestic flights. So our marketing will be tied in with their efforts in terms of visitation coming back to our destination. However, overall domestic market, the domestic market is going to rebound first, and we'll continue to focus on those efforts. But clearly, as we look at our future, the international market is extremely important, and our relationship with Brand USA plays a huge role in terms of our opportunity to bring that market back to Washington. Chris Thompson is the president and CEO of Brand USA, and he does what we do from an international perspective for the entire U.S. But Brand USA is headquartered in Washington, D.C., and I've asked Chris to join us, thanks to the mayor, to share a little bit more as to what they're doing from an international perspective to bring that market share back to the U.S. So, Chris?
So good morning, and thank you, Elliot, and thank you for the opportunity to join you and Greg and Roger and the mayor for recognition of National Travel and Tourism Week. Also, thank you, Mayor Bowser, for the opportunity for us to highlight the important role travel will play in the recoveries of our local economies, our state economies, and certainly our national economy. But let me pause and say that only when it is safe to do so, people will travel again. Only when it's safe to do so, and certainly there's a lot that goes into determining that, not the least of which your efforts here in our nation's capital. And when they start traveling, as Elliot said, first they'll do it locally, then they'll do it regionally, then throughout the country, and then finally internationally. And while international travel is likely further down the road, they are a key demographic to bolster our local economies because, as Elliot said, they come, they stay longer, and they spend more. So currently, Brand USA is focused first on supporting our partners like Destination DC. As Elliot stated, his funding is predominantly tied to the lodging industry, and certainly that's the case with a lot of our DMOs around the country. So that is a challenged funding model at the moment, so their resources are limited. So we're trying to do everything we can to help our partners like Destination DC navigate while we're in the middle of the pandemic and certainly as we move beyond it. And second, we're working hard in a respectful and appropriate way to keep the USA top of mind among our international visitors. We basically have three tenets that we're following as it relates to those efforts. The first is that we're providing guidance, information, and insight to our partners like Destination DC First and foremost, through international consumer sentiment research that we're doing on a monthly basis, where we're gauging the pulse of our international friends and visitors all over the world, talking about first their ability to travel, and then hopefully keeping the USA top of mind as far as their destinations of choice when they can travel. And then second, we have a massive global footprint with boots on the ground around the world, and certainly the relationships we have with our travel trade and our travel media allow us to also provide great insights that guide our strategies and guide those of our partners as we share that. The second thing we're doing, and we're doing it in a respectful way, is to try to deliver some form of hope and optimism. Certainly we're in the middle of this pandemic, and that's the highest priority. So we've paused our paid media in our in-market activations. Nobody really wants to be promoted to at the moment. And we're really focusing on a stay at home and stay inspired campaign. We're posting organically to our 7 million hand raisers around the world who follow us on our Go USA TV channel and our social channels. And as they're sheltering within and otherwise self-siloing, they're looking for ways to be inspired, to be distracted, and otherwise entertained while they're doing what they should do and stay home. So these social channels and this television station that we have are appropriate ways for them to be able to stay inspired and remind themselves why the USA is a destination that they want to eventually travel back to. And then the third and final tenet is, while this is all going on, while we're navigating the pandemic, we're building smart marketing tools, strategic, measurable, accountable, relevant, and time-bound, so that at the first indication of recovery, and let me pause and say, and only when it's appropriate and safe to do so, we're going to have a coordinated campaign that will help prime the pump and hopefully reach out to our friends and our visitors from around the world to encourage their active consideration of the USA as a destination, and certainly their bookings to destinations like DC. Again, we know that our local DMOs like Destination DC are going to be challenged through resources. Their highest priority, as Elliot said, is that local and regional market that's literally right on the back door that is a huge opportunity to bring people back right away. What we're going to do, and hopefully we're going to be in a great position to provide the muscle and the prime the pump to be able to reach out to our international audiences and bring people back. So Elliot, Roger, thank you for the opportunity to join you here in recognition of National Travel and Tourism Week. Mayor Bowser, thank you for your courage and your leadership in helping our nation's capital navigate these unimaginable and unprecedented times. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now, as we talk about the importance of markets, we focused on the domestic and international market from a tourism perspective, and now we're going to talk conventions for a minute, because it's a totally different ballgame. In most cases, citywide conventions take 5 to 10 years to book, and unfortunately, in a year like 2020, we're in an unprecedented position because we've lost over $163 million in terms of cancellations from 22 citywide conventions coming to Washington. And that does not even account for meetings that are taking place in individual hotels. So, we are focusing on our efforts in terms of recovery. And I think one of the key questions that most of the media have asked is, do we think that the virtual world of Zoom and WebEx will take the place of face-to-face meetings? And the data tells us that we're ready to meet in person and that there is more of a precedent and a willingness for individuals to meet in person. So we feel like this meetings industry will continue to rebound quickly and in a strong way. We're fortunate that just a couple of weeks ago, we booked a major convention for the city, Lions Club International. It's for 2027. That sounds like quite a ways away, but it isn't, especially for a booking of this size. First time in the U.S., first time in Washington, D.C., should I say, 25,000 attendees, a nearly $15 million economic impact, and the most important thing is that it's booked over the 4th of July, which we don't book conventions over major holidays. So this is a huge booking for the city, and this was just recently done during this pandemic.
Yes.
And this is a sign from our perspective that there is a rebound and there's an opportunity for us, and our organization is going to secure that opportunity with future business, as well as rebookings from those that perhaps have canceled because of this pandemic. We work closely with a lot of allies, but our strongest ally is Events DC. And as the mayor referenced, Greg Odell, president and CEO of Events DC, is here with us as we work closely in a variety of avenues, especially with the mayor's efforts with Reopen DC. So the importance of what Events DC does and the impact, the economic impact they have on our community is significant. And I commend Greg and his team for some of the financial opportunities they've done recently, including additional marketing dollars for our organization to promote DC post this pandemic. So I'd like to turn it over to Greg Odell now.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Elliot, for the introduction. Mayor, thank you for having me here. On behalf of our board of directors and our staff, it's an honor here to be with the mayor and her administration as they lead us through these unprecedented times. I think Elliot, Roger, and Chris laid out quite well what our recovery plans will be at the appropriate time. But I probably want to focus my comments on frankly, what we have been doing and what's in front of us today. As I said, these are unprecedented times and they require unprecedented actions. And so through our mayor's leadership and certainly as we take direction, our board has been firmly committed to first focusing on mitigation. And so we know that the first and highest priority is public health. And so we've been honored to be part of that response. And many of you certainly are aware that the convention center is being converted to a temporary hospital alternative care facility. That construction has been going on now probably for the better part of 3, almost 4 weeks. The operation should be fully ready on May 12th. I know the mayor plans to preview that operation on May 11th. We're thankful for, again, the mayor's leadership, her entire administration. It's been seamless in terms of the interaction and coordination with our team, and we have been happy to do so. Also working with the Army Corps of Engineers and all the other corresponding agencies as well. The second focus for us has really been on relief, and so we recognize this is a time when many of our industry partners are suffering severely. We work quite closely not only with Elliot's team at Destination DC, but also with the Hotel Association and the Restaurant Association. We fully recognize for what we do as the Convention and Sports Authority, we rely heavily on the support of our partners, both the hotel industry as well as the restaurant industry. And so the board took the unprecedented move of approving on April 9th a hospitality relief package that included $5 million in funding for the hotel industry, $5 million in funding for the restaurant industry, and then also an additional $5 million for undocumented worker community that we know normally would not have access to relief funds otherwise. And then the last component, as was mentioned, was the marketing dollars that we know at the appropriate time will activate as well. We have made significant progress on many fronts. We have finalized those programs for both the hotels and restaurants. And while we have not finalized the undocumented immigrant worker program that we spoke of, there's been lots of progress have been made. I would submit that we feel the urgency as much as anybody. We want these dollars to get to these families, and so we hope that we'll be able to announce the finalization of some programs very soon. There is probably a multi-layered or faceted approach where there's a ground game of many different organizations that will be in close communication with those families. And there's also some coordinating agencies as it relates to the processing side of that as well. And so we will announce as soon as possible when we have those plans finalized. But we're happy and honored to serve in this capacity. I think Elliot certainly showed in his presentation the impact of our industry, and we are in close communication with our customers as when the mayor has said science will lead, and when we're ready, we will be ready to operate across all of our venues and drive economic impact through the tourism and hospitality industry. But we're honored, and we will serve the role that we need to serve going forward in that process. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. So I think the key thing for us is as you've heard, to continue to focus on safety and recovery. But as the mayor has tasked us all with, one day we see that our city will reopen, and we need to be prepared and engaged to bring visitors back to Washington, D.C. So recovery is extremely important to us. Some of the things we've been doing through our website, washington.org, is encouraging some individuals to use hashtag DC Together to promote things that are happening in Washington, D.C. The fact that, of course, restaurants are still offering services, and all those restaurants that are offering takeout are on our website, and there are opportunities to do business with those that are in our own community, which is extremely important. Of course, we've all heard from the Smithsonian and all the other avenues that are out there. There are virtual opportunities to learn more about what there is to see and do in Washington. Our hope is at the right time we'll be able to focus those efforts to bring people to Washington, D.C. as a destination. The mayor always asks, what are we doing with the local community? We're always focusing on the local community, and we are very pleased to hear that so many of you go to washington.org to find out what there is to see and do in Washington. So our key goal is to continue to follow the mayor's lead in terms of safety and recovery, and to focus on things to see and do in Washington at the right time. We work closely with organizations such as the Restaurant Association, headed by Kathy Hollinger, and the Hotel Association, headed by Solomon Keene, and as well as Events DC, as we look at our future, because beyond this is the opportunity from an economic perspective to bring individuals back to Washington and to help our economy recover. So with that, I'll say to the mayor, thank you again for all of your efforts and this opportunity to talk about the importance of our industry, especially during these extraordinary times, and thank you very much for all of your leadership. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Elliot, and thank you all for your presentations, and we will take some questions. Yes, Sam.
Yes, Mayor. I guess the governor of Virginia announced something Monday, the governor of Maryland may announce something today. Are we any closer here in D.C. to a date for phase one of reopening D.C.?
As we've discussed, Sam, we are looking at several things before we enter phase one of reopening. That includes a sustained period of declining cases, looking at where we are with our hospital capacity, also looking at how we are going to be able, through all the phases of reopening, to test and track people coming back into the economy. So we do not have a reopening or a phase one date at this point.
A question also for Mr. Odell. You mentioned a list of groups that were getting money. Can you give a little more explanation? You said $5 billion to hotels, $5 billion for restaurants, $5 billion for undocumented. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So on the, I'll speak a little bit about each. So on the hotel industry side, so we work closely with the Hotel Association and developed a program where we will allocate basically on a per room basis to each of the qualifying hotels, which are really the majority of the hotels in Washington, D.C., which approximate about 145 hotels across about 34,000 rooms. And so they have to submit documentation to us to make sure they're in good standing and all the things that you would expect to make sure they're properly vetted. But we've developed a program where we will provide funding on a per room basis to those hotels. And that process has already started. So they are submitting their documentation, and we hope within the next 2 weeks we'll have made payment to all who qualify. On the restaurant side, similarly, we went through a process of evaluating how we could reach as many qualified restaurants as possible. We had the good fortune of teaming with Deputy Mayor John Falchecchio and understanding that they had a significant need through their microgrant program. And so we saw that there were over 1,000, almost 1,100 applicants that were restaurateurs, that were very targeted restaurants that we were looking to actually provide funding to. And so we have combined forces where we're actually going to provide funding through the microgrant program to support the deputy mayor and the mayor's efforts, and so that we will basically help fund some of the restaurateurs that applied through that process. The thirdly is the one that we have not finalized yet, and that is the undocumented worker program. So as you can imagine, we're not necessarily in this space, but we felt it was important to contribute certainly to those that don't have access to funds otherwise. And so we've been working with the Deputy Mayor's Office. Some members of our board have spent a lot of time working with various organizations that actually work directly with those families. And so we have to set up a network of how those monies would get to those families, and then also how we will process the payment as well. And so that has not been finalized, so I can't announce or specify the names of those organizations yet, but we hope to do so very quickly, and time is of the essence for us. We want to make sure we get those funds to those families as quick as possible.
But you set aside $5 million for that now.
We have.
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, just a quick clarification on your numbers that you're giving out about the $1.7 billion in taxes. Is that Washington D.C. specific, or is that a regional impact that your figures reflect?
That's specific to Washington, D.C.
All the numbers that you're giving us are just in Washington D.C.
Everything is specific to D.C.,
I
yes.
appreciate that very much. Mayor Bowser, if I could ask you, Virginia Governor Northam has said that they're going to start reopening restaurants and whatnot in Virginia. Ocean City Boardwalk, while the weather may not be awesome, will open this weekend. What are your concerns about district residents who are still in a stay-at-home order, going down to their beach houses over the weekend, going over to Virginia so they can sit in a restaurant, and then coming back into the city? And did you convey any of these concerns to the governors of Maryland or Virginia?
Oh, well, let me say, D.C. residents and D.C. government employees are under a stay-at-home order, and they should only be going out for essential work, exercise, food, medicine, and supplies. That stay-at-home order has not changed. What we know is that when the economies, whether they're around us or around the nation, start opening up, that more people will get infected. We know that. And we've seen that with all the model changes, as we start reopening, come out of social distancing, more people will get infected. So DC residents who are participating in non-essential activities, no matter the jurisdiction, put DC, their households, their neighbors, people they're on public transportation with, at risk. And that's why we continue to be in the stay-at-home posture, and that's why we continue to watch our cases very, very closely.
Does it concern you, and have you talked to either of the governors, that they are somewhat out of sync with what's happening here?
Well, I don't know exactly where they're going to land in Virginia. I don't think the state of Maryland's posture has changed, but I don't know where they're going to land. I think that the governor said he would be making some decisions by May 15th in Virginia.
Any thoughts on last night? We saw, not just in D.C., but around the region, crowds at Mexican restaurants for Cinco de Mayo, not social distancing at all. Any thoughts on that? And were there any incidents in D.C. that police or inspectors responded to, took any action last night?
I don't know about actions. I haven't gotten that report yet, but D.C. police responded to at least a couple of locations that I'm aware of. I think people want to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. I celebrated Cinco de Mayo at home. And I think what we saw, some restaurants really who switched their model from dining in to carrying out. They just weren't prepared for it. So we help move people along.
Mayor Bowser.
Yep.
I have a question for Mayor Bowser and Mr. Ferguson.
Yes, James.
Mayor Bowser, just want to clarify something. Recon is not going to take place this year. The
Recon.
International Council of Shopping Centers.
It was canceled, I believe. Right, John? I think they canceled it in April. Yes.
It would have been next week.
Right. Okay. And Mr.
Or the
Ferguson,
week after.
one of the things that Washington, D.C. never has to worry about in terms of being a tourist destination is because it's the nation's capital. Indeed, in many parts of this country, coming to Washington, D.C. is like a lifetime trip. As this pandemic slows down and gets down, are you going to really bring up the point about this being like a lifetime trip to come to Washington?
Well, we'll continue to focus on the diversity of the visit to Washington, D.C. It's really interesting how the global community specifically and nationally, how they perceive D.C. as a destination. You know, we love the fact that people come for monuments, memorials, and museums, but in some cases, they have a perception that DC is not as exciting as other cities. So what we do focus on would be those traditional rites of passage. Right now, we would normally be flooded with 8th graders coming to the city. We love them. The economic impact of their 8th grader is not as great as others, so we want them to come, and then we want them to come back 10 to 15 years later. But from our perspective, we're looking at making sure that that visitors understand how diverse DC is a destination. So we do focus on theater, nightlife, sporting events, outside activity, and all those, of course, our great restaurant scene, because from our perspective, that is sometimes lost as it pertains to individuals wanting to come to DC for the federal experience, but not recognizing the fact that we have all these other amazing things in which they can enjoy. One of the things I appreciate the most from an international perspective is that when we have journalists come, and Roger referenced earlier that the mayor played a huge role in us welcoming journalists here a few years ago, is that they have no idea how green we are, the fact that we have 2 amazing rivers, the historic perspective of DC, the architecture of our city, and these are the things in which we want to also focus on above and beyond coming for the traditional reasons.
You just highlighted a great way for the Reopen Committee to talk about reopening. Because what I heard in your question is, this is a lifetime trip. This is the Washington that your grandfather told you about. And that's great. That is part of what Washington is. But for a lot of people, they need to understand all of the things that have been added to the Washington experience. And so I think the reopening will give even a new spin to what Destination DC does with that story every day. Okay, Bennett from the Washington Post.
Hi, first question is about events tourism. Can one of the officials explain what kind of a message you'll want to send to visitors who are going to be wary of going to theaters or restaurants in a coronavirus world? How are you going to retool your message to make DC a priority for domestic visitors?
Yeah. Hey, Fennett, this is Greg Odell. First, I'll start, and Elliot can speak to messaging. So I think one of the things, and the mayor just referenced it, we are working on the Reopen Committee, and specifically our committee focuses on faith, arts, culture, entertainment, sports, and hotels. And so part of the challenge, and the mayor has been clear, science will lead the when, but our mandate is to focus on how we will reopen. And so we've asked and tasked all of our committee members, which we have an amazing group, and I should also mention Angie Gates as the co-chair. We've focused on what creative and innovative solutions can we come up with that would be potential for how we reopen some of these venues and attractions that you speak of. And we should all think that, we're not going to just return to normal operations. Like, we may never see normal operations again, and it will really force us to think about our businesses differently. And so the first step, I think, is to first reimagine what that will look like when the appropriate time. And then the second step, which Elliot can speak to, is the messaging behind that. But that has been the focal point of the committee.
A good point, Greg. And I will say that the most important thing for us is to listen to the science, listen to what Dr. Nesbitt has been saying locally, listen to what Dr. Fauci is referencing. I'll say that there are 2 concerns that I have. One, the messaging has to be consistent so that as U.S. Travel Association is focusing on recovery and listening to what the Hotel Association, the National Hotel Association is focusing on, that we're looking at guidelines that are really clear and not confusing to visitors coming to the city. So we'll use our website, washington.org. Of course, we'll team with our city in terms of data that they have to make sure that visitors know exactly what to do and expect when they're coming to the city. As was referenced by Greg, Reopen DC is giving recommendations to the mayor in terms of things that make sense in the various sectors sectors in which we focus on as a destination. So we're going to rely on them to give us the specifics that we can put on our website in terms of safety, coming to the city, and expectations, and then we'll focus on things in which they can see and do and make sure that they're aware of what is expected at whatever that venue is, be it a sporting event or a concert or a major event that's happening in the city when the time is right for that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then, Mayor Bowser, I know we've discussed Virginia's announcement. A lot of residents have been hearing the message from you, Northam, and Hogan is that there's going to be some consistency across the Washington region for reopening. So what do you say to the residents who see, oh, well, Virginia looks like it's about to take steps? Is D.C. In coordination with Virginia to also start opening up later in May?
I think I've answered that question. I'm not sure how your question is different.
Well, what I'm asking is that we've been hearing consistently that the Washington region will be consistent. You've told us that D.C. doesn't have a specific date for reopening, but we're hearing that in Virginia they are looking at a specific date. So are you still working coordination with the governors of Maryland and Virginia, or are all of you doing your own thing at this point?
Well, Fennett, I'm the mayor of Washington, D.C., and I am going to do what's best for our jurisdiction, including letting the governors that surround us know what the data say in Washington. Now, what we see in all of the jurisdictions, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, are growing case counts and continued community transmission. So we know that opening up and people mixing in various ways are going to lead to increased infections. We know that. And we do think that seeing decreasing case counts, increasing testing and contact tracing is the only way to open up safely. So we are focused on essential activity in our city. That's what we will continue to tell our residents and DC government employees, no matter what jurisdiction they're in, that staying at home is the only way that we're going to be able to safely open up. David from USA Today. David. Okay. No David from USA Today. We'll try to come back to you. Martin from WAMU. Martin?
Hey, Mayor Bowser, it's Martin Osimo it's Martin from WAMU here. So you guys released data today down at the neighborhood level, much more granular than you've been releasing in the past. Obviously, a lot of people might be looking at this now and jumping to conclusions about what it says about their neighborhood and should they be concerned. Well, first off, can you just address if there's any kind of reason or why you think there's a certain spike in cases in places like Columbia Heights and 16th Street Heights? And then the second question being, what's the message to residents who might live in these neighborhoods that have higher case counts? Should they be nervous? Should they do anything different? Or is it just, or should they not draw conclusions?
Well, I don't know that we can say anything definitively, and I don't know if I would call it a spike. I think those cases may have been trending higher throughout the response, but I would have to have Dr. Nesbitt address that. What we're focused on right now, Martin, is commercial activity as well as types of jobs in housing types. As possible factors and why we see more cases. Our focus right now is reminding people to listen to their bodies and any symptoms and to get tested. What's critical here, and it's critical throughout the city, is if someone is positive that we are able to isolate them. So they need to know if they're positive, and if they can't safely isolate in their home, then they need to reach out to us so that we can attempt to help them isolate. That way, we won't see the cases expanding in households. And certainly, we don't need people, if they even think that they could be sick, traveling to an essential job, using public transportation, any of those things. So that's what we're drilling down on right now. Okay. Ashraf from AP.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Bowser. I have a question about the bits of the federal government appear to be reopening or warming up to a reopening in fits and starts. The Senate, of course, is functioning, has resumed functioning. The IRS is talking about bringing employees back in limited numbers into their offices. It seems to be going agency by agency. So I'm wondering how much coordination your administration has with OPM on this issue. I mean, these are residents; they're taking public transport into work if they're called back into work. Can you talk a little bit about the level of coordination that's involved in something like that?
Sure. We, of course, have been in contact with OPM. We have been in contact with OPM on a regional level where we have encouraged them to maintain as much telework as possible. You will recognize that government work is essential work and it is excluded from the stay-at-home order. However, if you look at our own government, DC government, we have about 40% of DC government workers reporting to a workplace, including some of the fine people that are supporting this press conference. But 60% of the people are working at home. We think that is a greater number of federal workers are working at home. Actually, a greater percent of federal workers are working at home. And we continue to encourage the federal government to maintain that posture. We do know, however, that operational needs may necessitate some changes for some work classes that they may need to be in person to do their work. And I have to make similar decisions at DC government depending on what our needs are. Okay, back to David from USA Today.
Hi there. I'm wondering for Mayor Bowser specifically, are there plans eventually when there is a reopening, would there be, a socially distanced type of reopening to attractions like the Smithsonian, National Monument, things like that? Would it be, it obviously wouldn't be all at once, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question? Is your question, are the Smithsonian's going to reopen?
My question is regarding if, once the Smithsonian's are ready to say open, if they would open with, would guests have to make reservations? Would there be socially distanced type of restriction?
Sure. I can't speak for the Smithsonian just yet, but I know that Greg's committee certainly will be in touch with them about what their plans are and make recommendations around socially distancing. Now, the Smithsonian is not one place, right? I'm about to give your spiel.
Please do.
The Smithsonian is 17 places, right?
Technically, yes.
Technically, yes. Including one that I want to be one of the first places that I go back to, and that's the National Zoo. So there may be even different recommendations for different parts of the Smithsonian. A lot of our monuments and memorials, obviously, they're open, but I would expect that there may be some strategies put in place to keep people from crowding. But I think you're thinking in the right way, that there will be a slowly turning on of activity in large venues like that. Now, most of those venues, the medical professionals will tell you, are treated differently than a meeting space. They put them more in a category of a shopping, of almost like retail, because people are moving around and not sitting in one place. So there will be different strategies to deal with that type of venue.
Mayor, if I can,
yes, please.
if I can expound, this is Elliot Ferguson. We've been in contact with the Smithsonian's. They are on the board of directors for Destination DC in terms of the plans that they have in place. I know that they are internally discussing exactly what to expect, and we've made some recommendations to them in terms of the customer experience. Our primary concern is that with social distancing and things that will be in place as everything reopens at some point, we want to make sure that the experience is not one that is a deterrent for visitors possibly wanting to come to Washington, D.C. as a destination. So as the mayor referenced with the Reopen D.C. committee that Angie Gates and Greg Odell co-chair, they have been talking to us, and we hope to be able to share some insight very soon as to what they're planning at this point.
Okay. All right. One last round.
Well, I have two, if you don't mind.
Oh, of course.
Quick, I'll make them quick. So maybe for Mr. O'Dell and Mayor Bowser, several independent venues around the country have banded together and they've hired Aiken Gump to lobby Congress on their behalf.
Yep.
930 Club, U Street Music Hall, Pearl Street, these venues that people come to from out of state that, you're talking about
Sure.
preparing for. They feel like they were the first to close, really, and they'll probably be the last to really reopen.
Sure.
Can you talk about what the plan is for dancing, for mosh pits, for these venues that
Sure.
that was their business model? It was completely anti-social distancing.
Sure.
How do they get, and when do they get back on their feet?
Sure. No, it's a great question and point, Mark. So you're absolutely right. And, all the other venues that frankly are in the mass gathering business, we're all in the same boat. We were the first to close and could be conceivably the last to open. Having said that, that is exactly the task before us on the reopen committee that the mayor referenced and that we've talked about today. So the plan hasn't been finalized, but I will say many of the stakeholders that you mentioned are part of the committee, or they've been directly included in that process as part of the outreach. And so we were pushing everybody to get as creative as possible or innovative. Again, health will lead as to whether we can open, but we're going to hopefully come up with some solutions as to when the time is right, how they will open in some phased reopening process. And so at the mayor's direction, we'll release that report as part of her overall strategy. We will address some of those elements, and some of them, frankly, may be in a later phase because you can't necessarily mitigate those factors.
And Mayor Bowser, if I could just follow up with you quickly on your mask this morning, an RBG mask. I'm assuming you wore that because of her being in the hospital. I'm just wondering if you have any words to anybody.
I did. I got a very nice, a DC resident sent me some masks that have a lot of different designs, and one of them was for Madam Justice. We understand that she's under the weather, but working today from her hospital bed. So we want to wish her a very speedy recovery. Yes.
I will follow up sort of on what Mark was talking about. In the fall, you have two large events that occur here in D.C. That's the Congressional Black Caucus Legislative Foundation meeting. And of course, and he was here last week, Howard University's homecoming. Have you gotten any sense from either of those institutions about what they're going to do in the fall?
Yes. So actually more than two. So we have a pretty extensive schedule, or in terms of our fall lineup of conventions alone. And we're focused, obviously, talking about conventions, but this includes our sporting events and the other. But on those specific ones, we've been in constant communication with those customers. First and foremost, we have not canceled those events that are in the fall, but we're discussing with them, obviously, any plans for if we either have to cancel or how they may restructure their events. And so I don't want to get ahead of them because they are still working closely internally to also figure out how they reconfigure. But I will say, broadly speaking, that is the case for the majority of our customers, and we are in close communication with all of them on a regular basis. We had to do this as we looked at our spring lineup and then the summer lineup, and some of them obviously have been canceled in the spring and summer, but for the fall, we have not canceled a lot of those events, or they have not decided to cancel, and we're looking at, one, if it's feasible, but again, we'll be led by the science as to whether we can have those meetings, and if we do, what they will look like.
Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
Just quickly, Mr. O'Dell, one thing you did say that just got me, you said we're not going to return to normal operations. We may never see normal operations again. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So I think, too often we all focus on the impact as opposed to what could be the possibilities. And so, yes, we're going to have mass events again, so please don't mischaracterize me or thinking that we won't return to having huge conventions. But it also will allow us to think differently about how we adapt to these situations and still have some continuous operations. And so As an example, Elliot made reference that there is the digital event experience that we've all seen, and ironically, many people thought that would be a threat to the face-to-face meetings, as an example. Well, anecdotally, we've seen, and actually some studies have shown that once you've had a digital event or experience, particularly as part of your live event, it's actually increased the attendance in the prior year because people then wanted more content. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to think about how we address all the event activities and programs that will change dramatically, that may still have some existing elements or programs that we spoke of, but we should challenge ourselves and think about how we can actually do our events differently. And we're doing that for our venues, and we know our customers will also do that for their own experiences.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.